I'm delighted to be joined by Suzanne Evans, who's a former Deputy Chair of UKIP, now involved with Leaders of Britain and very prominent Brexit campaigner. So thank you very much for your time. So obviously the place to start, we have a new Prime Minister. We have Boris Johnson, a Brexiteer. Do you trust him to deliver Brexit?
It's very interesting, isn't it? I've always had a lot of time for Boris. I've always thought he is a man who can be respected. He's very bright, very erudite, obviously very committed to politics, very committed to his party, I think very committed to the country. But it's interesting, I do meet people that say he can't be trusted, people who claim to know him and say that. But I think the situation that, the way I feel about this is that he's absolutely nailed his colours to the mast now about leaving the European Union on the 31st of October, not a minute longer should we stay in that awful club. Yeah. So I feel that, whether you personally might trust him or not, I think he's backed himself into a corner, and it's a corner that I'm very happy to see him backed into, if he needed to be backed into it. Personally, I don't think he did, but there you go. So yes, I absolutely do trust him to deliver Brexit. And you look at the people that he's put around him, the team that he's brought in, it's kind of like a reincarnation of Vote Leave in many senses, isn't it? You've got Dominic Cummings there heading up the sort of chief man at number 10, plus various other ministers, of course, cabinet members are now people who were on the Vote Leave board and were highly prominent Brexit campaigners, and very few Remainers, one or two. But I understand that he basically sat them down and said, right, we voted leave, we're signed up to leaving on the 31st of October, you don't accept that, you're not in my cabinet. So those people have obviously knuckled down and taken that approach. So yes, I feel very confident about leaving the European Union on the 31st of October. I wish I'd been here to celebrate. Sadly, I won't be. I'll be in India. But I will be celebrating in Mumbai.
Do you think there's any chance Parliament can manage to frustrate the process? Clearly there's people in there who will be attempting to.
Well, they're obviously going to try, because they've been trying ever since, I think, the vote to leave, which was so unexpected from their point of view. It's quite interesting. You hear talk on social media about something called Brexit derangement syndrome, and I find it quite incredible. I honestly think this might very well become the next thing in the next version of whatever psychotherapeutic textbook is going to be published when its next edition is due out. People have been driven mad by Brexit. Yeah. It really upset the ruling class. It really upset the Europhile elite. To a really quite astonishing degree. I think it shows just how out of touch they were with the feelings in the country, that the majority of people in this country wanted to leave the European Union and they didn't realise it. They just didn't realise it. So, and unfortunately, the majority of those people are also in Parliament.
Yeah.
So, of course they're going to try and frustrate the process. Personally, I don't understand the shenanigans and ins and outs of parliamentary process and arcane laws that might be brought to the fore or not, to know whether or not they're able to do that. But looking at it from somebody who's not an MP, so not in that bubble, I think if Parliament really did frustrate the process, they are taking a hell of a risk with democracy, with their own careers, with their own potential for re-election. If after all this time, and when all the no-deal preparations have been made, if there isn't a deal with the EU, and Parliament somehow pulls some nasty little trick out of a bag to stop Brexit, I think there's going to be a massive revolt. And I'm not talking about a violent revolt here, I'm just talking about a political revolt against Parliament. That's not a good look.
There's been talk that Boris's team is preparing for kind of the People versus Parliament style election in the autumn, should Parliament try to frustrate the process. Do you think that's a realistic possibility? And if it does happen, does it worry you that the Brexit vote could be divided between the Tories and the Brexit Party, whereas the Remain votes might manage to coalesce around parties?
I think actually, almost since day one post the referendum, it has been Parliament versus the people. We've seen how Parliament have behaved, particularly in the last couple of years. And for us Brexiteers, it's been atrocious, absolutely atrocious, the extent to which they're prepared to go to undermine democracy. So I think if there was a general election, if a general election was forced before October 31st, which I actually don't think is going to happen, by the way, but if, I may be proved wrong, but I don't think it'll happen, but if it does, then I think it will be Parliament versus the people, and I think Boris will win. There's no doubt about that. But to answer the second part of your question, yes, I am worried. I think it is pretty clear that Boris Johnson intends to deliver Brexit. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I do worry that if Nigel Farage fields candidates against people in, well, actually against any Conservative candidate that signed up to a potentially a no-deal Brexit, I think he does run the risk of ousting not just strong Conservative Brexiteers, but strong Labour Party Brexiteers as well. And as we saw in the recent by-election in Gloucestershire, I think he potentially allows a Remain candidate to come through the middle.
Yeah.
So we'll end up having more Remain candidates in Parliament. And I can, unfortunately, conceive of a situation in those circumstances when Nigel Farage is the man that prevents us leaving the European Union.
Oh, and that would be quite.
And he needs to think very carefully about what he does in that situation.
What do you think the solution would be? Is it for the Brexit Party to stand aside a lot of seats, or some kind of formal or informal coalition, perhaps local understandings? I mean, how to kind of avoid the two parties going head to head?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I think almost the answer to that question is how much is the Brexit Party like the UKIP of old? I'm not talking about UKIP today, which I think is completely dead in the water, gone in a direction I certainly can't condone, can't have anything to do with, and I left the party quite some time ago because of that. But the UKIP of old, did have some very different policies to the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party stole quite a lot of UKIP policies from the 2015 and 2017 manifesto. One notable one being the fact they're now setting up an office for veterans, which was something that we proposed back in 2015. So it's how much differential stuff in terms of policy can the Brexit Party put between itself and the Conservatives in order to think that it can win more seats. So let's see what policies the Brexit Party come up with. And let's see what offering they've got besides Brexit. Because if they haven't really got much to offer besides Brexit, and Boris Johnson is absolutely committed to Brexit, what is the point voting for them?
I mean, do you think that Nigel Farage is trying to set up a sort of a new right of centre political party which could potentially replace or compete with the Conservatives? Or do you just think the Brexit Party is to get Brexit done and then he'll be happy?
I think it's just to get Brexit done, to be honest, which is why I think they've been very slow to put forward any other policy offerings.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting, really. The Conservative Party's future depends, I earnestly believe, on delivering Brexit. I think if Boris does not take us out of the European Union, the Brexit Party will clean up and the Conservative Party is finished.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the survival of the Brexit Party depends on the Conservative Party's failure to take us out of the European Union. So it all gets very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, one interesting fact is the position of the Labour Party, and particularly the Labour leadership. I mean, do you think the Labour obviously the Labour Party's position is, depending on what day of the week it is, something along the lines of they will support a second referendum and remain on any Conservative deal. Do you think the Labour leadership are really behind that? And do you think the Labour leadership are kind of, all these people around them have been secretly helping the Brexiteer cause?
It's interesting, isn't it, that Jeremy Corbyn seems to stand firm on all kinds of principles which I simply think are unconscious. His support for, or certainly seeming support and encouragement for various organisations around the world that are committed to, what shall we say, active anti-Western interests, let's put it that way. And yet Brexit seems to be the one that he has capitulated on. He's always been sometimes a very hardline Brexiteer, wanting to take Britain out of the European Union, or certainly seeing the flaws in the European Union. But now he seems to have been pushed into a corner and bullied around by his party, and he's come out. They've become a Remain party, effectively. And I think that's a massive mistake for the Labour Party. I really do. It might appeal to Jeremy Corbyn's constituents in Islington, Emily Thornberry's constituents, and people like that. You have constituencies that are more middle class, the sort of old champagne socialist type Labour voters, but the rest of the Labour Party voters, they're not going to countenance that, because 5 million Labour voters, we think, voted leave. That's a massive electorate to turn your back on by changing your policy from 2017, when of course they were committed to get us out of the European Union. So I think the Labour Party is also facing an existential crisis now as well. because it has so totally lost touch with its grassroots, I think. It's been coming for some time. Brexit, I think, has been the catalyst for showing the Labour Party to be something different other than what it was when it was founded. It has now become a much more elitist organisation. You look back, I suppose, 50 years at the Houses of Parliament, I think you'd find an awful lot of Labour MPs were working class. Go back 50 years before that, when you were talking about my great-grandfather's era, he stood for the Labour Party 3 times. Didn't ever become an MP, but he stood. He was a minor. You know, how many people are there now who are members of Parliament for the Labour Party who are actually working class? Very few.
So the Labour Party's moved away from its working class base.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's something we were talking about before the camera went on, but I mean, have you been surprised by, obviously the Brexit saga has been going on for a few years now, have you been surprised by just how much viciousness it's provoked?
The viciousness, for me, started from day one, after the vote.
So it wasn't during the campaign?
No,
not so much.
I mean, the campaign was a campaign. You expect a bit of viciousness. Yeah. Of course, each side goes for each other. It's part of the game, almost, if you like, isn't it? It's what you have to do and what you expect. But it was a victory on a personal level, right from day one. So, for instance, I had friends, not only a couple, who'd been friends and knew what I did. I was in UKIP at the time. I knew I wanted to leave the EU. Oh, good for you, Suzanne, standing up with this. Day after the result, well, I hope you're going to pay my mortgage when we lose our jobs and our business, because it all goes wrong. And you've just prevented my nieces and nephews from going to live in 27 other countries around the world. How dare you? I thought, well, hang on a minute. You know me. You know what I stood for. And you were perfectly happy with that yesterday when you thought you were going to win. But now you suddenly don't like me. And you don't want to be my friend anymore because I turned out that I was right, fundamentally. And that, so at a personal level, that was quite a shock. I have to say, I've got other friends, obviously, who are very ardent Remainers, but we are still friends. It is absolutely possible. But so that was shocking. But then the sheer way in which I alluded to it earlier, this kind of Brexit derangement syndrome has come to the fore, and Remainers has got gradually more and more angry, and more antagonistic, and more nasty over the past few years is quite shocking. And whilst you can kind of expect it from somebody on Twitter who you don't know and doesn't have a role in public life, when you see people like Andrew Adonis and AC Grayling talking in this way and being quite nasty, it's like, what's going on here? It really is very, very worrying, actually. Yeah. And I don't quite know how we put it back together again, because at some point, it reminds me of the days when I was a reporter, and a couple of occasions I was sent to Northern Ireland. And it was like, are you Protestant or Catholic?
Yeah.
And now it's, are you Remainer or a Brexiteer? Yeah. And this division's awful, and we've got to move on from it. And for me, I think the only way you can move on from it is by leaving the European Union and making a success of it.
I mean, perhaps a slightly simplistic question, but why do you think we didn't leave the European Union on time? Do you think there are people in the government who were deliberately sabotaging the negotiations, or do you think it was it cock-up or conspiracy?
I'm afraid I think it was conspiracy. At the end of the day, the legislation was there for us to leave on the 29th of March, and we didn't. Yeah. And there was only one reason, actually, why that didn't happen, and that is because Theresa May went on her hands and feet and grovelling to Brussels and asking for an extension, and then another extension. Yeah. And with hindsight now, I used to have a lot of time for Theresa May. She, before my time, but she was a councillor in the London Borough of Merton, and then I subsequently became a councillor in the London Borough of Merton. So although we only met, I think, once briefly, I was very impressed with her. There was a kind of like an unspoken connection, so I always followed her career with interest. But the way she approached the whole thing was wrong from the word go. And looking back on it, I think I've drawn the conclusion that actually she was still a Remainer and she didn't want to leave. I think she recognised that democracy dictated that we had to leave, So I think she was trying to play a middle ground game of, right, well, we'll leave, but we'll, in leaving, stay in as much as possible, so that in a couple of years' time, if we want to, we can go back in, and it will all be very easy. That's my reading of the situation. But in the process of trying to play both sides like that, she lied again and again and again. We now know that she never intended to leave with no deal, despite the rhetoric. It was all a load of puff. And it's quite sad. I have very little respect for it all now. I think it's a great shame that what happened. I was as pleased as anyone else that we had a second woman Prime Minister, and that was great. But I'm sorry she didn't turn out to be a better one.
Yeah. I mean, are you on obviously there's kind of divided in the Brexit movement between those who think that the withdrawal bill is fundamentally just about acceptable if you take off the Northern Ireland backstop, and those who think that even if you do that, it's still utterly dreadful and should be scrapped and we should leave with no deal or whatever. I mean, which kind of side of the debate do you come down on?
I'm definitely the camp that says the withdrawal agreement is awful.
Yeah.
We can argue till we're blue in the face about what leave meant. I think it meant leave. That's simple. That means going, leaving everything behind. Doesn't mean not having a good relationship going forward, but it means leave. And people say, oh well, we didn't know what a deal would look like. So you've talked about a deal, but we were talking about a trade deal.
Yeah.
We weren't talking about a pre-deal deal. Before we started talking about trade, that we had to agree, or we couldn't go any further. That suddenly came out of the blue. Effectively, was really a shock, and not the way to play it at all. And again, I think allowing that to happen was completely wrong. But no, the deal it's a terrible deal. It's been rejected by Parliament 3 times. It's 3 times, isn't it? And I think it will be rejected again if it's just tweaked and brought back. I think no deal is by far a better option than that withdrawal agreement. As I said, leave means leave. It means leaving the European Courts of Justice. It means oversight of the European courts. It means them having oversight over us. It means not paying them any more money for nothing, effectively. And it means having the right to control our own sovereignty. And the withdrawal agreement doesn't actually allow for that. The backstop is perhaps one of the best examples of how it absolutely refuses to take our sovereignty back, because it means that we're in hock to Brussels forever and can't remove the backstop without Brussels permission. That's not my understanding of a free and democratic and open country. But that is not the only thing. The backstop is perhaps the most evident example of how Brussels is still trying to pull the strings in this agreement. It's certainly the only.
Yeah.
I think it has to be torn up.
Okay. And I mean, because obviously Boris says he wants a deal. I mean, and he says that the chances of leaving without a deal are low because he's confident he's going to get a deal. I mean, do you think that that's a modified version of the current withdrawal agreement, just with some kind of tinkering to the backstop, or do you think that he's really planning to tear it up and start again? I mean, given that we've got sort of 90 days or something.
I hope he's planning to tear it up and start again. It's a deal that's dead in the water. It's not a deal that's healthy for our country. It's a good deal for Brussels, a marvellous deal for Brussels, but it's a terrible deal for us. And so it's got to go. And as I said, I think if you look at swings and roundabouts, checks and balances, which is the worst, no deal or the withdrawal agreement, signing that withdrawal agreement or something even vaguely like it is far, far worse in the country than no deal. We will get over no deal. We can have an opportunity to find our own way and do well under no deal. We don't have that under the withdrawal agreement.
I mean, kind of like on a slightly more broader Brexiteer subject, I mean, one thing I found when I've spoken to a lot of Brexiteers, is that there's a kind of divide between those who think that, I mean, the EU is fundamentally flawed and anti-democratic and just terrible, and that it's bad in of itself, and those who just think it's inappropriate for Britain to be a member of it. They possibly accept that other countries might want to stay in it and keep it together, but they just think that it's not really in Britain's interest. I was kind of wondering, what's your position? Do you think the EU is fundamentally flawed, or is this not appropriate for us?
I guess, if I had to choose between one or other, I'd say I think it's fundamentally flawed. I think if you look throughout history, at any time that a kind of, let's use the word dictatorship, Any kind of some overarching authority,
Yeah.
perhaps to use less emotive language, has tried to group together different cultures, different nationalities, different languages, different governments, and merge them into a super state. It's worked for a short period of time, but it's never lasted. So, I'm old enough to remember the fall of the USSR, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. All these attempts to merge by force countries together don't work in the long term. That's my view. And I think that's why it's fundamentally flawed. It's not something like the United States of America, which was, I'm putting aside all the arguments about indigenous peoples and how, of course, they were done a terrible wrong. But in terms of the founding of the country, it was founded on a set of constitution everybody signed up to, and it was something new that started from scratch, rather than something that was already existing that was forced together. So I think in that sense it won't work. I think it is anti-democratic. It is fundamentally anti-democratic. I think when it started, it was a different entity. When it started, it was a group of countries that had a comparable economic base. It's changed beyond recognition in many senses, and that, of course, has caused a lot of the problems that it's now facing, and a lot of the resurgence of nationalism in those countries that previously wanted to join and wanted to sign up. And we might be the first, but I don't think we'd be the last by a long chalk. And I actually don't think the EU in its current form will exist within the next 20 years.
I mean, from a kind of Brexiteer perspective, so obviously the new EU Commission President, the former German Defence Minister, whose name very embarrassingly eludes me. I mean, she is an open call for the United States of Europe. She's a very strong federalist. I mean, do you think she's kind of like a gift for the Brexiteer cause in this country?
Is she a gift to the Brexiteer cause? That's an interesting question. It's funny, isn't it? I think she's only a gift to the Brexiteer cause if she causes people who are currently on the Remain side to sit up and take notice and think, oh, actually, well, maybe I was wrong. But in my experience, the real hardliners don't. It doesn't matter what she says. It doesn't matter what they do over there in Brussels. The hardline Remainers simply don't care. Theirs is an ideological commitment to the European Union. And even if the facts change, they will not change their opinion. And I believe firmly if the facts change their opinion. It only makes sense. So in that sense, I don't think she is, no. But I think in terms of the Brexiteers, I suppose it gives us the opportunity to snarl and say we told you, which isn't a bad thing sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, one argument I always found very interesting during the referendum is that essentially that there's no status quo option. So either the UK leaves, which clearly restructures our relationship with the EU, or we remain and it continues in its fundamentally federalist direction and we get dragged along with it. I mean, it's an argument you find convincing, but there was never an option in 2016 based just to keep everything as it was and, hunky-dory.
No, there wasn't, absolutely not. And I think people who said we just want to stay and carry on as now, we're completely living in cloud cuckoo land, and all the stuff that I remember talking about. Look, they're going to want a common tax system, they're going to want a common criminal justice system, and let's not forget, British criminal justice has evolved in a very different way from other countries in Europe. We believe strongly in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. That doesn't exist in some other countries on the continent, so that was a big one. Financial harmony, obviously the euro already exists. There would undoubtedly, if we were staying in, be a push for us to join the euro and Schengen. We wouldn't be allowed to stay out of it forever. That absolutely wouldn't happen. So all these things that we were saying during the Vote Leave campaign, this is not the status quo. We are moving to becoming a United States of Europe. Oh, don't talk rubbish. Oh, don't talk rubbish. Well, yes, obviously that's now been proven that we were right.
I mean, just turning very quickly finally to UKIP. I mean, do you think UKIP is now completely dead in the water? It's just finished?
I have to. There's a part of me that says I hope so, because it's almost embarrassing in its current form to have been associated with it. When I was in UKIP, we were called racist, we were called bigots. the overwhelming majority of people I met in UKIP were neither.
Yeah.
And the odd ones that I felt might have some dodgy views. Well, to be honest, were they any worse than some of the views of people I'd encountered when I was in the Conservative Party? No, not really. So we had this image that was a poor image, but we had right on our side, if you like. We knew that we were not what we were called. I still think that 2015 manifesto that we produced was one of the best manifestos, if not the best manifesto ever produced in British political history. I stand by that. It was a good party. We just wanted to leave the European Union, and we had a vision for Britain that was a vision that was very positive outside the European Union and enabled us, if we left, to be able to bring in so many more innovative policies that we couldn't do, stuck in this anti-democratic bloc. So it was a good UKIP. It was a good UKIP, but unfortunately, under Gerald Batten's leadership, it went bad. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, do you
it
feel
was
the
horrible to watch. Horrible.
I mean, do you feel the party was almost hijacked? I mean, I started to get the impression that a lot of people didn't understand what Gerald Batten's real views were until he became leader, or perhaps the extent to which he held them.
It's interesting. I know Nigel always had his doubts about Gerard. He was right. It's a bit like the Labour Party, the Momentum's takeover of Labour Party. I think it was. I knew that Gerard had made some comments about Islam which I didn't particularly like, and in fact, when he became leader, I had a shocking awakening actually as to what his views were. So I said, "Look, Gerard, congratulations on becoming leader. I got a degree in religious studies. I've done lots of interfaith work. You've said things about Islam in the past. I'd be very happy to work with you to put forward, to be able to undo some of the damage that's been done to your reputation because of some of the things that you've said. And let's work together to find a decent policy going forward."
Yeah.
And he just said, best way, Suzanne, is to just quote the Quran and all the awful things in it, and just to chuck their own words back at them. So he clearly wasn't interested in putting forward any kind of much needed message to try and combat the rising problem of Islamism. He clearly it was obvious to me from his comments that he just didn't like Islam. And he wasn't going to give it any credence, whereas whilst I absolutely, Islamist terror, absolutely horrific, extremism in any kind of religion, absolutely horrific, but I think there's some good in Islam. I think, like any religion, it has good and bad in it, and it's people that make it so, and it's how you interpret texts. But I certainly don't write off Islam, absolutely not.
And I found it very interesting how you compared kind of the Batten-Robinson takeover of UKIP to the Corbynite takeover of Labour. Now, I mean, the interesting thing that happened then is that when, say, the Batten, the Stephen, the Axel Lemon people took over UKIP, most UKIP MEPs and most elected UKIP officials left. And when the Corbynites took over Labour, the vast majority of their MPs stayed. I mean, do you think there's almost an argument that the sort of the moderates in UKIP, so the people like yourself who quit, kind of gave Labour moderates a lesson on how to react to your party being taken over by the extremists?
I suppose it's slightly different if you're a member of Parliament. You have an elected position. You've been elected on a particular mandate, and also you have power, one would hope, in order to be able to change things. But for somebody like me, who had no role in UKIP whatsoever, and no power, there seemed to be little point staying around in an organisation which was rapidly moving in a direction which I found utterly distasteful. So yes, I felt I had to go. I mean, I did think about that argument, should I stay and try and change it within? But there came a point when I realised that was pointless, because like the Labour Party takeover momentum, I was actually doing a public meeting. It was all kinds of, it was a Brexit public meeting, basically. And Patrick and I both said we didn't like the way in which the party was going and what Gerard was doing, and we didn't agree. And there were quite a few people in UKIP in the room who argued with us and said, "You're wrong." So I thought, okay, so a lot of people have already left UKIP who don't agree. So the ones that are left are the ones who agree.
Yeah.
And I think I was kind of like clinging there because I thought, well, I did have a position in the party. I'm quite well known in the party. I need to try my best to make it work. But it was pretty obvious to me, and I think to Patrick that night, that we'd lost the battle.
And one very quick final question. So Brexit happened on October the 31st. What would be your kind of percentage confidence that's going to happen?
I'm feeling pretty confident at the moment, actually. Yeah, although I'm an optimist, I am so totally an optimist. Always look on the bright side. But I hope I'm not completely deluded. I would put it at about 85%.
Yeah.
So I hope, as I say that, that's kind of a shrewd judgment as opposed to just complete, wishful thinking.
Well, Suzanne, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thanks a lot.